Thank you, Senator. Thank you, Senator. As I listened to what the Senator had to say about John stirring the pot, I thought, not many people can stir the pot better than Joyce Elliott. There were a lot of hidden messages in what she said in the introduction to me, but they weren't lost on me. I want also, as Representative Blount has indicated, to welcome all of you, to acknowledge all of our elected officials, our pastors. Two of my pastors are here, I see, and all of the folks who have taken time out of their busy schedules to help celebrate today. Senator Steele was talking about not letting Monday be forgot and in any way diminished by the activities of Tuesday. He mentioned the sacrifices that Dr. King made that allow the celebration of Tuesday to even be a reality. And I hearken back to a trite and worn phrase that we've heard so many times, yet is so applicable and came to my mind when Senator Steele was talking about how we all stand on somebody else's shoulders. We all do. You do, I do. There's not a person in this room who doesn't stand on somebody else's shoulders. And even though it's trite, even though we overuse the phrase, the fact that we can remember come Tuesday that the new president, to a large degree, stands on the shoulders of Dr. Martin Luther King, Jr. is an appropriate remembrance. Now, the young people in this room celebrate this holiday for a very good reason. They're not as old as some of the other folks in this room. And if you don't celebrate the holiday, and if you're not taught the history, it will be lost and forgotten. Because as people who lived through the 1950s, even as children, or the 1960s, even as teenagers, will not be with us forever. It is an inevitable fact of life that those who still have a first-hand recollection of what Dr. King was doing will be gone. And if you don't celebrate annually and teach annually, if you don't teach the children, then they won't appreciate what he did. History has a way of blurring events to the point that the context in which things occurred are lost. That really struck me 2 years ago, sitting in the mansion when we were in September celebrating the 50th anniversary of the Little Rock Central crisis, and we had the entire Little Rock 9 in the governor's mansion. And I made the comment at the Little Rock Central celebration at that time that the irony was that we had them in a reception on that Sunday evening before those week's activities occurred, had all 9 there with some members of their family. And they sat in the very living room where 50 years earlier, the governor of the state of Arkansas had sat in an effort to keep them from going to school. And that irony wasn't lost on me, but was never more poignantly brought to bear than when we talked about the next day the idea that if you don't teach the children about what they did and the sacrifices that they made, that you diminish those sacrifices and you lose it forever. It's just a page in a book. So the celebration of Dr. King's life and the celebration of his sacrifices and the inclusion of the next generation of Arkansans and indeed of Americans is an essential obligation for people who believe that Dr. King made the difference that he made. And as Tracy mentioned, we will celebrate Tuesday the election of an individual to the highest office, not just in this nation, but the most powerful office in the world. Somebody who will stand on the shoulders of Dr. King. Dr. King said in 1963 that we are not makers of history, we are made by history. Well, at the risk of, I guess, usurping my authority, I would suggest to you that Dr. King was only half right in that statement. We are indeed made by history, but Dr. King was a maker of history. He just said that because he was humble. His humility overrode the facts at the time. He didn't do that often. Usually what he said was dead right on. But his humility wouldn't let him acknowledge or admit that he was a maker of history. Certainly it made him, and it makes all of us. He was the product of what history had done to him and to so many others. But he wasn't satisfied with merely having history make him. He also made history. That's why we're celebrating it. He changed the course of a country's future. About 3 or 4 years ago at the Martin Luther King celebration, I was a keynote speaker in Jonesboro. I've done it in Conway before, Ronnie. I've done it here in Little Rock on a number of occasions, but on that occasion, I don't remember whether it was 3, 4, 5 years ago, we were in Jonesboro, and I was participating in the MLK celebrations in Jonesboro. I made a comment then that I have made on subsequent occasions that is a part of the history that generation needs to be taught. Dr. King was successful for a lot of reasons. One of the things that struck me was his message of nonviolence. Because you see, if he had not had the wisdom, and indeed, preacher, the guidance to understand how important the nonviolent, in effect, turn the other cheek approach was in the 1950s in America, he would not have been successful. He softened a lot of hearts. Had he not used that technique and that tactic, he would have hardened a lot of hearts. And I will submit to you, it took more courage morally and physically to turn the other cheek. It took more courage to continue in the face of violence to reject violence. It took more courage when dogs were set loose and fire hoses were set loose and churches were bombed. It took more courage for him personally and all of the people that he tried to influence to say, do not react to violence with violence. Now that's a lesson that most of us fail miserably on. Somebody gets in my face, my first reaction is to get right back in their face. And we got a lot of important people in this room that I know really well who respect Dr. King, and I can promise you I've seen them react in that way. But Dr. King rose above all that. He rose above all that. And because he had the moral courage to do that, he succeeded at a much faster pace than otherwise would have been accomplished. So we celebrate, we remember, we acknowledge, and we honor. And lastly, we all must try on our own level to emulate those principles that work so well for him. I'm not going to be able to do it. I'm going to fall down. Probably before the day's over, somebody's going to get in my face and I'm going to forget what I just said and probably get red in the face myself and react to it in like manner. But we should all strive not to. We should all strive to do better. You catch more flies with honey than you do with vinegar. And you can shame and soften the hearts of your critics and your enemies oftentimes by reaching out to them in love. That's what Dr. King stood for yesterday. That's what his principles stand for today. And that's what that generation should remember tomorrow. Thank you.